Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
From First Paw Media, sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company, this is the Dog Driver Show. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert Forto and Kurosh Parto.
Hello and welcome to the Dog Driver Show. This is Robert Forto and I'm here with my co-host KP. How's it going?
Yes, Robert. So today we have someone very interesting from the land of Down Under, from Victoria, Australia, southeastern Australia. Annie Jackson is with us. She's a sled dog racer in Australia. She's been doing this for a long time, actually. I'm a Facebook friend of hers, and of course in the sled dog milieu, we all know each other. We are a big family. So I wanted to talk to her to learn a little bit about racing in her climate, in her environment, and sled dog racing in Australia in general. Annie, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
You are doing excellent. Annie, you are our very, very first Australian guest. And tell our listeners about yourself and what are you about?
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's an honour to be the first Aussie on here. Yeah, well, like a lot of people, it's a very typical story. I fell in love with reading as a child, the White Fang, Call of the Wild, that kind of thing. I was lucky to actually have a German short-haired pointer as a child. So, I used to make him harnesses and, pretend I was a musher and all of those sorts of things. The first Siberian Huskies actually came out to Australia in 1985. And I got my first Siberian in 1988, and in a very short amount of time had quite a lot of them. And of course, the sport was just starting then. As soon as the Siberian Huskies came to Australia, some clubs popped up, and of course the first dryland race was held here in 1989. So I was really fortunate to be able to be in on the, the grassroots level of the sport starting here, which was great. In a very short amount of time, less than 10 years, we had a lot of sled dog racing clubs operating in Australia, and there was quite a good race circuit to go on. That was all dry land. Yeah, we brought out a lot of people. It was a very enthusiastic community here. We brought out people from overseas to help us out and to teach people all about sled dogs and things. We had people like Dee Johnroe, Lee Gilchrist, who was a Siberian musher back then. And for me, probably one of the most influential was Tim White, when we brought him out in the mid-90s. And he was so blown away by some of the things that we were doing in dry land. And he also brought like a wealth of knowledge about Alaskan Huskies with him and that sort of thing. And he actually took the idea of the scooters that we were running then back to North America, and that took off as well. So, that was pretty exciting that someone like Tim White thought that we had a good thing going with the scooters. So that was great. So since then, I've the last sort of 10 years sort of switched over to a lot of hounds now. I was lucky to get 2 pups from the first litter that was bred here from imported semen from a Eurohound from Christina Lindner. So from then I've bred 2 litters. Well, actually just had my 3rd. So I've got quite a lot of those now. So running those a lot. I've still got 9 Siberians left, and they're still racing and doing really well. But yeah, I do like the Hounds. They're a lot different dog, and I think a little more suited to our climate here in a lot of ways. So we've got 30 dogs here at the moment, and we usually run 3 to 4 teams at most of the races we go to, and it's quite a good circuit that we can do around the east coast of Australia. The west coast, the travel's prohibitive, so not very many people travel back and forth. They're kind of their own sort of entities, but some people do make the trip.
So Australia, as we all know, is a huge, huge country. You travel tremendously, going from one side of the country to the other side of the country. How do you do all these races with different pocket of climates that you have for each event?
Yeah, well, like I said, most of the races are actually on the east coast. So if you were going from one of the southernmost races on the continent, and up to the northernmost race, you're probably looking at a 3-day drive. So it's quite a lot of driving we do. You need to have some good vehicles and be used to traveling. And obviously, our dogs are quite used to the routine and all of that stuff. Like I said, the west coast is right over the other side of the country. I think that's a 4 to 5 day drive comfortably with dogs. So, there's not a lot of driving back and forth between the east and the west coast. A lot of the times, some people will travel from the east to the west if it's for a national championship race, one of the bigger events. But most of the time, we sort of travel along the eastern coast from race to race and state to state. We do have a club that started now in Tasmania. They've been active for, I think, about 5 years now. But to go there, you actually have to go on a overnight trip on a boat. So that's also really cost prohibitive. So, we've got that little pocket down in Tasmania where actually the climate is really well suited to racing. It's quite cold there, and they do have a lot of snow as well. But, to actually get your dogs there is a bit of a trip. So there's not a lot of people travelling from the mainland over down to Tasmania. So it's mostly the east coast where there's the most people and the most sort of travelling in between.
That is interesting. Annie, I've done many interviews with some big names and some breeders, some racers, but this interview is very interesting because I have so many questions. I mean, not a lot of people, they think of Australia being a sled dog country, right? Because of your climate, because of where you are. And so just learning that you have hounds and you're doing artificial breeding to create super athletic, fast dogs is fascinating. When you go to races, do you have different classes or all the dogs, they run in the same class?
Yeah, no, we do. We have just started having in the last few years canicross and bike drawing. They're kind of new to Australia compared to the other classes because I think monosports is becoming such a big thing with sled dogs all over the world. So it's a lot easier for people to compete in classes where they don't have to have a huge kennel of dogs. So monosports is really taking off with the bike drawing and the canicross here, but we've always had the scooter classes and the rig classes right from the beginning. We have 1 dog, we have 2 dog, we have 3 dog, we have 4 dog, we have 6 dog, and we have 8 dog. So they're the classes that we run, as well as now the canny and the bike drawing. Obviously, there's, a lot of interest in the 1 dog and the 2 dog and the 3 dog because those classes are really accessible for most people. Most people can have, 2, 3, 4 dogs. whereas it's a lot more difficult to field a kennel that can sort of run 6 and 8 dog. Our local laws around here are not particularly, in Australia, are not particularly dog friendly. It's really heavily regulated. So it is very difficult for people to have bigger kennels. A big kennel here is considered 20 to 30 dogs. Most people have a lot less than that, as compared to, North America and Canada and things where 30 dogs would be considered a relatively small kennel. So, yeah, I think the smaller kennels are what's mostly here. And it's really good for, we try and include everybody. And like I said, the 1, 2 and 3 dog classes are quite big, At a big race here, we'll be pushing, 200 entries, which is quite big. And a lot of those are the smaller teams.
200 racers, that's incredible.
That's at a big race, At an average race, we'll be looking at, I'm not sure, 40 to 80 sort of, that's at an average sort of a race. Yeah, we do get some quite big entries, and it does ebb and flow, some years it'll be a bit down and some years it'll be up. But yeah, for a national championship race, we can be pushing easily 200 entries.
You talked about hounds. How are the hounds perceived in Australia? I know that usually when the sled dog sport is blooming in a country or in a state or wherever, they start with purebreds usually. How are the hounds affecting the sport?
Yeah, well, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Like you said, most people start with purebreds, and that was how it was here in Australia as well. There was some purebred pointer teams getting around. I actually had a pointer myself in the mid-90s. So, there was some purebred pointer teams, and they did very well, but they were maybe perceived as a bit of a novelty. But then, now the last 10 years, the hounds have really taken off. There's quite a few people running them now. The bigger kennels have... are running pointer crosses and the Eurohound crosses. And just very recently with the bike drawing and the canicross and the 1 and 2 dog scooter, it's opened up a whole new field of mushers here, which are people getting the pointers and the pointer crosses for monosports. They've been so successful in Europe and Scandinavia. It's very common over there for people to be using the hounds for the smaller teams and for skid drawing and that kind of thing. And there are still obviously a lot of maybe biases from the purebred people, maybe, but we're a pretty accepting bunch. We pretty much are like, if you want, whatever you want to run is what you want to run. And the hounds have taken over a little bit. It's not unusual now to see the hounds and the purebred GSPs taking out sort of the top 3 to 5 places at most races. They're a different animal than the purebred, so they do tend to excel. So, no, it's pretty good, and I think they've really taken off just recently. This summer there's actually, in the next year, there's, a couple of quite good litters planned. There's going to be a lot more of them around, and I can only see that increasing more and more.
Being in Australia, I believe you have some system, quarantine system, and because of that, do you have your genetics of the hounds and sled dogs in general, kind of an inbred pool, or no, you're still able to bring new blood from Alaska, Europe, Canada to increase the gene pool?
So the quarantine here is quite stringent, and also because of that and transport and that kind of thing, importing a live animal is very expensive and a lengthy process. So the route that people are taking here and have taken is we actually import semen from dogs. So that's the way the gene pool has developed. So and I know of 2 other people who've just recently or are in the process of importing more semen from different lines. But at the moment, the gene pool is not inbred at all, because there's only been a very small handful of litters bred, and they've all been crossed with purebred pointers, which there's, a lot of those here. So, at the moment there's no inbreeding, which is good. And I think there's a really bright future for the dogs here. I mean, they're really well suited to the climate here with their shorter coat, the short distances we run here because of the climate. And they're a very strong dog, so they do excel at all the classes that they run in. And they're also good pets, people who have running monosports or small teams, their dogs are usually their pets because they don't have a big kennel. So, they live in the house and that sort of thing. And I think the pointer crosses and the hound, the Euro hounds do make very good pets in that environment.
You talked about, Annie, the race circuit on the East Coast in general, and if I'm not mistaken, your summer is our winter and our winter is your summer. Tell us about your race season. How does it start? Where do you go? And dry land, snow?
Yep, so we can usually, the temperature gets down. I mean, obviously, most people won't run their dogs or train their dogs in anything over about 15 degrees. We like to train around the 10-degree mark or under. That sort of depends on where exactly you are on the East Coast, because the further north you get, the warmer it gets. The further south you get, the cooler it is. We're sort of looking, depending on the season, on starting training around March to April, once the temperatures drop. And, of course, we're talking about a lot of early mornings and a lot of night training happens here because that's when the temperatures are cool enough. And you've only got a limited window before it does get too warm. So that's sort of the biggest challenge that we face here, is finding the right temperatures early season to be able to train. And feet as well, because we're training constantly on dirt. That sort of limits you to how far you can go and that kind of thing, as well as the heat. I mean, I actually spent the winter at Mitch Seavey's kennel in 2017, and that was the first time I'd ever been to Alaska or North America at all. And just seeing the difference in the dogs with the cold temperatures was such a big wake-up. Our dogs in training or racing, they come back, they're panting, they're hot, they're almost borderline too hot, even no matter how careful you are. And it was a big difference to see the dogs over there that, they're not even panting. They come back and they don't even want to drink. And that was a really big eye-opener, and it was a bit sad, really, to realise, the difference in performance and how comfortable the dogs are with the temperatures that we run here, even though we do, only run in under 10. I mean, I remember one day at Seavey's it actually got above 0, so we cancelled training for the day. Whereas here, if it was 0, we'd be thinking, wow, this is so super for the dogs, So that's sort of the biggest thing. So, we start training around March, April, depending on the weather. And then our first major race on the East Coast is in the middle of June. And the temperatures are traditionally very good by then for racing. And that's actually one of the biggest races. So we have one of our biggest races of the year right at the start of the season. And then we'll usually have a race almost every weekend. We'll travel to dryland races, interstate and in our home state as well. Almost every weekend. We end up with a couple of weekends off in between, depending on how much travelling we want to do. So we get into that routine then where we're racing on weekends, we're travelling on the Friday to get to races, and then we're training, a couple of days during the week as well. So it's quite busy. And then our last race, so in August we end up, we have 3 snow races, And that's sort of usually the end of our season. That finishes right at the start of September is the last snow race. And, yeah, that's pretty much our season over. There might be one more race 1 week into September, and then the temperatures are starting to go up again. And, yeah, so our dogs have the summer off, and we try and keep them active. We have a dam they can swim in. We have, a lot of free running. We have a big paddock, and, we try and keep them active with other sort of little sports in between over summer. And, yeah, so it's almost every weekend. If you want to go to a race here on the East Coast, you can.
And Annie, tell us the biggest race that you mentioned. What is the name of that biggest race?
That is called the Northern Victorian Sled Dog Classic. And that club, it's been renamed because the existing committee left and handed it over to a new committee about 10 years ago. But that was actually the first private sled dog club that wasn't a breed club, an open sled dog club. That was actually the first one in Australia. So, and they're still going. So I think they just recently had their 30th anniversary, which was a big milestone. So, yeah, like I said, they offer all the canicross, bike drawing, and all the way from 1 dog up to 8 dog. And they get big entries. It's all of our races are held in forests. And that's probably a big difference between here and other countries is we all camp because it's, it's not snowy and the weather's quite mild. We all camp. So it's like a big community, every weekend everybody's camping at races and interacting with one another and racing and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that race is the biggest one, and it's actually one of the only races that runs over 3 heats. Most of our races run over 2 heats. So that is a 3-heat race, and there's another race further north in Queensland that run a 3-heat race. So that's always a bit interesting, running 3 heats instead of 2. And it's actually my favourite race. I really love the tracks. I mean, I've been going there for so long. It's almost like a home away from home every year. And they have really good facilities there. They have bunkhouses and toilets and showers and all of those things that we quite often don't get in the other forests where we can. And this year they're actually holding the national championships there. So that's going to be great.
Fantastic. Annie, for our listeners who are just starting, and we have, in average, we get around 10,000 listeners for each one of our shows, and a lot of them are not dog mushers. They are people passionate about sled dogs, but they don't have dogs. For some of those guys who want to be involved in our sport, what do you recommend as a beginner?
Yeah, I'm a bit biased now. I would recommend, obviously, doing homework. That's the first thing anybody's going to say is do your homework, decide what type of dog suits you, and also what kind of environment you can offer a dog. So what type of dog do you suit? Obviously you can choose between your purebreds. Most of the working line Siberians are quite good in a lot of ways for people just starting out because they're such low maintenance and they will just run, basically, if you get a good working line Siberian. But then again, you've got your hounds, which are very well suited to our climate here and may suit a lot of people who only want 1 or 2 dogs. Because they are so powerful and they are so willing to please. Some of them do take a bit more, you have to show them what to do, whereas with the Siberians, you pretty much put a harness on them and they just run. The hounds are a little bit more work in that way, but not a lot. I mean, the hounds are purpose-bred. They're bred for running. They're also maybe a lot more high energy, a little bit more needy in that way. They can sometimes it does get cold enough here for them to need coats when we're out camping and that kind of thing, whereas you won't have to do that with the Siberian. But I think people should do their homework. They should look around, ask around, make sure they're getting a dog from, somebody who's successful. There's no point thinking you want to get into the sport and maybe getting, if you want to be competitive, I mean, that's the difference too. I mean, there's a big difference between wanting to be a recreational musher and wanting to be a competitive musher. That's probably going to change your decisions quite a bit. There's no point getting a dog that's, maybe from a pound, a rescue Siberian from a pound, and thinking that it's going to be suitable for what you want to do with it. And it's maybe not fair to the dog either, So, get a dog that's purpose-bred, that you like the parents, you like the style of parents and the kennel that it's come from. And, you've seen that the dogs are sound and that they're working and that they're doing a whole race season and they're doing well, because that means you're getting a healthy dog that's going to be suitable for what you need.
Annie, thank you so much. We're getting toward the end of our show. Wanted to thank you for the last 30 minutes you spent with us to give us all the information about your racing, your background, and racing in general in Australia. I really, really enjoyed chatting with you, and I wish you the best of the, summer in Australia, and hope to see you back in Alaska again. And this time you can come and visit some spring kennels at the same time, right?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm getting a bit old for all that cold, although I did enjoy it. It's a quite different thing, and it's so beautiful and so clean. And, I mean, at the moment with all this smoke haze and the heat and the fires, I wouldn't mind getting on a plane and just heading off to Alaska and coming back when it's autumn. Okay. That'd be nice.
Thank you so much, and we'll be chatting with you soon. I'll be following you on social media, and for our listeners, they can follow Annie Jackson on Facebook, and I'm sure when the show comes out, they're going to be listening to and ask you plenty of questions about Australian racing.
All right. Thank you very much, and good luck with your race season too.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, Annie.
All right. Bye-bye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From First Paw Media, this is the Dog Driver Show. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you can see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert Forto and Kurosh Parto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.